your troops with you pottering there.
Veterans?
Yeah, there. So you have already an advantage in the room.
The troops, because he's not so active in the business loudly ignoring you.
All right. Well, may I invite those of you who are lucky enough to have a seat to take their seats. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to what will undoubtedly be one of the highlights of this State of the Union conference, namely the debate between the lead candidates for the European election. It's quite a paradox for this institute to host this debate. I remember days in the early 1990s where the idea of lead candidates was discussed, and it was then regarded by people here in this very institute as some sort of, let's say, nice idea which would certainly employ decades before it would materialize. And tonight's debate is a good illustration of the fact that the political laboratory that is Europe is moving. It is changing. It is adapting to a series of challenges. And it's, of course, a great source of pride for us at the European University Institute to be able to host distinguished representatives of the main political families. But I want to stress that an invitation had been extended to all candidates, of course, for tonight's event. The debate will be moderated by Martin Sandbu, who is European commentator at the Financial Times, one of our media partners for the State of the Union conference, and I give him the floor without further ado. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Is this working? Good evening. Welcome to the EU leadership debate, hosted by the Financial Times and the European University Institute here in Florence. I am Martin Sandbu, the FT's European economics commentator, and I will be your moderator tonight. In just 3 weeks' time, European voters go to the polls, and 4 European parties' candidates to become the next European Commission president are here tonight to present their priorities and debate with one another. They are, from left to right, on the stage, not politically, Manfred Weber, the lead candidate of the European People's Party, Guy Verhofstadt, one of a slate of 7 candidates from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe, Ska Keller, one of 2 lead candidates for the European Green Party, and Frans Timmermans, the lead candidate for the Party of European Socialists. Please join me in welcoming them. Also invited were the European Conservatives and Reformists and the Party of the European Left, but finding a time to get everyone to be in the same place proved impossible. In the next 100 minutes, we will have a debate on what the EU should do and what the EU should be in the next 5 years. And to ensure that the debate is as free and fair as we want our elections to be, the campaigns have agreed on the following programme. At the start, each candidate will have 2 minutes to give an opening statement in an order drawn by lot. And we will then proceed to spending about 10 minutes each on 5 topics selected to reflect the concerns most often mentioned by Europeans and the biggest challenges facing the EU. They are migration, social and economic policies, climate change and sustainability, security, and EU foreign policy. In each segment, I will ask the candidates questions that they will have up to 1 minute to answer, and I will then facilitate a follow-up and discussion. We will keep track of the total speaking time used by the candidates, and if anyone takes more than the others, I will do my best to rebalance the allotted time. After the 3rd topic and after the 5th topic, we do want to get questions from you. That means both the audience in the room and the hopefully much bigger audience that is following the live stream. So I will take a question from the room, and we have two EUI PhD researchers who are somewhere in the back of the room. Stand up and identify yourselves. Christiane Petit and Maria Petrine, who will select questions from social media and the internet. So for those who are watching, not lucky enough to have a seat in the room or is in one of the overflow rooms, you may submit a question on the Twitter hashtag Florence Debate, or go to ft.com/EU debate. And if you say who you are and you keep your question succinct, you are much more likely to be chosen. So keep that in mind. And at the end, the candidates will give a closing appeal to voters in the reverse order from the opening statements. I have now abused my position as moderator by spending more than 2 minutes on my opening statement, but that's about it from me, so I will now proceed as planned and give the floor to the candidates. And we've agreed the order by lot, and we start with Ska Keller. Please, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Hello, everyone. We're talking here about the European elections, and these European elections are going to be much more crucial even than the other European elections, because they're going to be deciding about the future of the European Union. And each and every one of us will have to think about what future do we want for our common European Union. And there are those who want to have a future of the European Union which isn't the future. It's full of borders and fences, and we don't want that. There's also those who just want to meddle through and go on with the status quo. As Greens, we think this is not enough. We think we need to strengthen the European Union. The best we can do that is by rekindling the original promises of the European Union, which was peace. Let's think about the European Union as a peace force in the world, on human rights, building on those fundamental values. Let's think about a European Union that will actually be able and capable of addressing the biggest challenges that we have in the world, most of them the climate crisis, making sure that our children and also grandchildren will have an environment where they can live, where they can thrive. Let's think about prosperity for all European citizens instead of a paradigm of austerity. And let's think about the promise of democracy, of rule of law, of freedom, civil liberties that has drawn so many countries into the European Union. We were just remembering that accession on the 1st of May. And what we can do and have to do in order to strengthen that civil liberties are available to every single European citizen, no matter whether they live in Hungary or elsewhere.
Thank you very much. And may I encourage everyone to follow the example of using no more and hopefully a bit less than your allotted time. Next out is Frans Timmermans, Party of European Socialists.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. By the end of this month, you will have to take a crucial decision. A decision not just about which policies, which mix of left and right and centre politics, but a decision about the soul of Europe, the very essence of Europe. We've seen today again in Budapest the love fest of Orban and Salvini promising a Europe of borders, of exclusion, based on an idea of family values, which just means continuing to discriminate. There is an alternative to that, and I'm sure the majority of the European people want an alternative to that. They want to go forward, not backwards. They want to see history as an inspiration, not as a goal. They want to see discrimination combated. They want equality, not just between men and women, which is far-fetched still, but also equality between different religions, between different origins, between different nationalities. They want cooperation, not confrontation. They want us to find solutions together in dialogue, not by insults. They also want us to look at the future of our economy in a sustainable way. They want to change the nature of our economy. We need to be on their side. We need to make sure that we have a promise of a Europe that is fairer, that is free and remains free. The very challenge of freedom in Europe is being challenged today in some of our member states. The very idea of the basis of our European cooperation is being challenged, and we need to stand up. We need to give the vast silent majority of Europeans who want a free, fair and sustainable Europe a voice and clear policy options to make sure that we achieve what we need to achieve for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Manfred Weber.
Good afternoon. I have at the moment the opportunity, the chance to travel a lot like all my colleagues here as lead candidates of our parties, and I get always one question. thousands of questions, but always one question is the same when I'm asked by journalists, by citizens, and that is the question, why do you ask for leadership, for a role in the European Union in a period of time where Europe is so much under pressure, in a defensive situation, in a crisis mode? And my answer is, I'm 46 years old. I'm the first generation on this continent, who can say that I live all over Europe in peace and freedom. We achieved so much in the last decades, together. It's probably the best Europe we ever had on our continent. And I want to defend this, because I share the concerns that nationalism is back, that egoism is back, and we have to defend this European Union. And how to do this? I would add 2 points. One point is that for me, the key element is the method of Europe. When we listened to what happened in the Brexit case, it was the main message of, I want to have my sovereignty back. People are asking for involvement. People ask that this is my Europe, that this must become my Europe. And how can we do so? We must practice simply democracy. The parliamentarian democracy, which I believe in. I'm working since 15 years as member of the European Parliament in favor of a democratic Europe. And as an ex-Commission President, I want to strengthen this. As probably the first Commission President who was, first of all, elected as a Member of Parliament and then became afterwards Commission President, it is already a symbol that we have to do so, to work for a democratic Europe. And the second element is to be precise. People are asking us not to be too general, people ask us to be precise. And that's why to create loans for the families who want to build up their own properties, their own houses, to be in favor of trade, to be in favor of a master plan in fight against cancer, about an FBI on European level and a ban for single-use plastic, to make concrete offers to the people. That is what is the EPP doing in this campaign and what we try to convince as many as possible people in Europe.
Thank you very much, and let us also try to be as precise as we can in this debate. The final opening statement, Guy Verhofstadt.
Thank you. I'm a little bit a strange duck in this pool here in Firenze, the odd man out. And why? Well, first of all, I'm not a Spitzenkandidat because we don't have a Spitzenkandidat. We have a Team Europe with 7 candidates, 5 women and 2 men. And secondly, I represent a group now that will not longer exist after the election because we're going to create a new group, a broader group, a pro-European centrist group together with Emmanuel Macron, with our list in France, Renaissance. The main point why we don't believe in the Spitzenkandidaten anymore, because I was Spitzenkandidat 5 years ago, is that people cannot directly elect the Spitzenkandidat. Nobody of you, Mr. Pöttering, yeah, he is German, he can vote for Mr. Weber, that's not a problem. But most of you cannot vote for the candidates here on this stage. And that's the reason why we say yes to a Spitzenkandidaten system if people can vote for it, if we have transnational lists the fastest as possible. And it's a pity that the idea of a transnational list has been killed, because there was an agreement on this in 2014, a vote on this in 2015. So a pity that we don't have this transnational list, and I hope in any way that in the next program of the Commission, and I'm looking to Frans and to Manfred, we can have this transnational list on board, because that's the real democracy. And then on the content, the problem today is the following. The European Union is under threat, not the European project. Since Brexit, massively, the public opinion all in Europe is more pro-European than before Brexit. Everybody says we are not so stupid as the Brits to go out. But at the same time, we have a problem with the Union that doesn't fulfill, in their eyes of the citizens, the dream and the European dream. And that will be the key issue in the coming 5 years. Can the European Union again be the expression of the European dream that people are sharing?
Thank you very much. We will now move to the first of our agreed topics, which is migration. Migration remains, 3-4 years after the big refugee crisis, one of the concerns most mentioned by Europeans in opinion polls. We should at the same time remember that asylum and refugees is only one aspect of migration policy. Immigrants need not be refugees, and some countries worry as much about emigration and a shrinking population as about immigration. My first question is about refugees and asylum, however, and it goes to Frans Timmermans, because as Vice President of the outgoing Commission, you have a record to defend. the 2015 crisis happened on your watch, and Chancellor Angela Merkel famously welcomed asylum seekers with the words, "Wir schaffen das, we'll manage this." But surely from a European perspective, the conclusion must be that wir haben es nicht geschafft, we didn't manage properly. Thousands of migrants still languish in processing centres, others are lost and vulnerable as irregular workers, vulnerable to exploitation. And the resettlement scheme has not delivered anything near what was promised. So what did you do wrong then, and what will you do better if you are Commission President the next time round?
What we did achieve, that what was completely out of control in 2015 and 2016 is now under control. The numbers of migrants arriving in Europe are much, much lower, 90% lower than at the time. What we also achieved is that we have made a start of solving the problem of poor border guards. We have increased the strength of border guards. What we haven't achieved, and this is going to be a do-or-die situation, what we have not achieved is to reform the European asylum system and to create an asylum system which is fair, which creates solidarity between all member states, and which distinguishes clearly between people who have the right to asylum and people who don't, and which reconnects us with our fundamental values as Europeans, to make sure that people who flee from war and persecution have a safe haven in Europe and no longer die in the Mediterranean. This is something we still need to do. For that, you need all member states. And what I find difficult to understand is that Mr. Salvini today goes to Mr. Orban and says, we are friends, your solution is the right solution, where Mr. Orban is the one who has prevented us from finding a solution in the last couple of years.
I would like to ask a very concrete, specific follow-up. Are you in favour or not of reception and processing centres for refugees outside of EU territory?
If this can be done in close cooperation with the United Nations, with UNHCR, with IOM, then there is nothing against finding humane solutions for people outside the European Union. What is not acceptable is the situation today in Libya, where people are languishing in reception centres in conditions that are completely unacceptable.
Thank you. Ska Keller, you and your party are perhaps the most vocal supporters of welcoming asylum seekers, but if you were to be European Commission President, how would you actually go about making member states more welcoming as well, against the wishes of national governments? How, for example, would you reform the Dublin regulations?
Well, actually, in the European Parliament, we have managed to create across groups a consensus, a good compromise on the Dublin system. The CSU wasn't in favour, but everyone else pretty much was. So we should go and follow that example, because as European Parliament, we have shown how compromises can be done. And yes, we are vocal about welcoming and supporting people in need, because for me it's really unacceptable that today, in 2019, we're living in a European Union where people who are the most vulnerable, children, are dying in the Mediterranean. We all know it's happening. We even know where the boats are, and no one is going to help them. The Italian Rescue Coordination Center will call the Libyan Coast Guard, which does not exist because there's a civil war going on in Libya. And as a European citizen, I cannot accept that we totally trample on the value of human beings, of human life, and this has to be the core of our refugee policy.
Thank you very much. Manfred Weber, you knew that the Viktor Orban question would come up, so I will now give you an opportunity to address that. Orban said to La Stampa in an interview, I think yesterday, about Salvini, who is being welcomed in Budapest today. Salvini is the hero who was the first to stop migration at sea while we did the same on land. We don't know what kind of formation Salvini will create, but we hope that it will prove to be a strong one. The EPP must work together with the European right. Later we'll see what form this partnership takes, but I'd very much like Salvini to work together with the EPP. Now, Orban's party, Fidesz, has been suspended but not excluded from the EPP, so I would like to ask you, does he express what the EPP policy on migration is, and if not, what is it?
It's first of all not the policy of Viktor Orban. He's suspended. He has no impact anymore on the EPP policy. And you can also ask Franz Timmermans about the wording of Fico in Slovakia, a socialist who was very, very anti-migrant in his argumentation. So we all have our problems in our team. Let me say it in this way. That's why we have to be clear on this. Yeah, we can, Ska, we can talk also about the Lithuanians. We can talk about the government in Lithuania, where we have a government, a Green member there, who is a poorly populistic party. Let me be clear on this. But you were asking me on Orban, then I have to react on this. And the policy, if you allow me, for me as a Christian Democrat, Pope Francis was in Lampedusa and reminded us, due to our humanitarian responsibility, there is a condition for everything, that we are aware about this. We have to take over our responsibility. But the second step is also extremely important, to win back control about our border. We have to guarantee that the state decides who is arriving in Europe and not the smugglers decide. And there we have to be clear on this. And the third element I want to add, we have to care about Africa. I want to install a real EU commissioner only for Africa, because we have to prioritize this. Otherwise, we will not solve the problems in the future.
We will have the opportunity to get back to the question about Africa. Very quickly, can you answer whether you are in favor of reception and processing centres outside of EU territory?
I fully share the position of France in this regard. If we have a partner there, like we did it with the EU-Turkey agreement, then we can do so. We have to guarantee the minimum criteria, the minimum standards there, together with the United Nations. But I must tell you that the left in the European Parliament was heavily criticizing the Turkey agreement between the European Union and Turkey. The Greens were voting against strengthening of Frontex to add additional budget for our external border control. And then the question of whether we can send illegals who, after a fair procedure, have to leave the European Union. Whether we do a readmission agreement with the others, the left is not really ready to do so. We are ready to do so. So we have to be clear on the fundamental principles.
Thank you. I will let Ska Keller and Frans Timmermans answer the points that have been made against them. But first I want to bring in Guy Verhofstadt. Your party too speaks of avoiding a fortress Europe and argue in favor of extending the blue card system for immigration, because immigration, as I said, is more than refugees. Yeah. Your manifesto says, and I'm quoting here, it should be up to member countries to decide on the number, skills and qualifications of these migrants. Well, that sounds like not a European policy. So if you are in favor of significantly increased regular immigration to the EU, well, the question is, are you? And how do you propose to achieve this, were you to be Commission President?
Well, simply by the existing blue card, to apply that also in the whole of the European Union. Today you have 29 different legal economic migration systems, 28 of the member states, and then the blue card. And only Germany is a country who is using the blue card. So I want to generalize it. By the way, if I may say so, I find it not very serious to attack and saying to us, oh, the migration crisis. You know what the migration crisis in Europe is? The migration crisis is the incapacity of the nation states for the moment to decide on the new system, on Dublin, on legal economic migration and border issue. In fact, we should invite the members of the European Council here to tell us, to tell to France, to tell to Ska Keller and to all of us why they are not capable to reform the asylum system in Europe, because there is the real crisis. The fact that Mr. Salvini pushed them out of Italy to Germany or to Austria, and Mr. Orban is doing exactly the same. So if we want to end the migration crisis the fastest as possible, to have a real European migration policy. That is needed.
As promised, I would like both Ska Keller and Frans Timmermans to address the specific points that were made, but quickly, please, within 30 seconds. Mr. Timmermans, Manfred Weber's point about Fico, and whether you also have anti-immigrant allies that don't quite comply with their own policy.
You know, I'd rather have him just answer the question about Orban, which he didn't. But I'm happy to answer the question about any social democrat who misbehaves. The Smer Party is now within the borders of right behavior. They opposed the quota in the refugee crisis. They even went to court and lost in court, so that's where we are. I don't think that's of the same nature. But I am willing to tackle any party, like I've done with the Romanian party, when they misbehave and they don't abide by the rules of the rule of law. I've been very strict on that, and my party is very strict on that. So Manfred Weber doesn't need to worry about that. I think he's got a bigger worry on his hands with Mr. Orban.
Thank you. Ska Keller, you were accused of not supporting the Turkey agreement. Why?
oh dear, I'm very scared that indeed I did not support, and we as Greens do not support an agreement that is not respecting human rights. The Turkey deal has led to the situation on the Greek islands as it is right now. We very much oppose it, that human rights are not at the forefront of when we're dealing with people in need of protection. But we should indeed talk about the reasons of why people have to flee, why member states need to export weapons into conflict areas like it's happening right now to Saudi Arabia. How about we talk about those reasons and what we as European Union can do to address those?
Thank you. We could talk about this all night, but we have to move on to our next topic, which is social and economic policies. Last Monday, the European Central Bank published its latest data on net investment in the Eurozone. Net investment meaning investment into housing, infrastructure, machinery, and so on, over and above what is needed just to replenish aging, depreciating capital. And those numbers show that net investment by governments has been zero for the last 5 years. Manfred Weber, does this not show that Europe's fiscal rules, which were even toughened during the crisis, in large part under the leadership of your political family, are not fit for purpose because they hold back badly needed public investment?
First of all, when we speak about today's economic situation, we created in the last 10 years 13 million new jobs. All countries of the Eurozone are under 3% deficit criteria, and we have a growth rate above 2%. That are the figures of today. We created future. And that was due to reforms. Yes, I am really committed to reforms. I see the need of reforms. When we talk about globalization, about demographic development, nobody can tell the people that there is no need of reforms. We have to reform our countries. And in the countries where we did it, mainly EPP governed, I must tell you, it was Enderken in Ireland, it was Rajoy in Spain, it was Anastasiadis in Cyprus. Where we did it, we have positive economic development. There is no need to do no other alternative than to do the necessary steps for the reforms. But what I want to do is now to invest in innovation, to have openness for trade, because that is creating jobs for the future. 36 million jobs are linked to trade in today's European Union. And we have to cut red tape, because that is a real burden for our small, medium enterprises in the European Union. And we have to do, in these points, really engaged steps, and then we can create growth for the future.
Thank you very much. One of the reforms that has been talked about for a long time is Eurozone reform, and in particular, Eurozone fiscal reform. Guy Verhofstadt, the new European Commission, its start will coincide with talks about the new EU budget, the multi-annual financial framework. A common budget for the Eurozone is supposed to be negotiated as part of the overall budget talks. Will you push for a significant Eurozone, centralized Eurozone budget? What should it do and how large do you want it to be?
No, I'm in favor of a Eurozone budget. And the best is to do it inside the existing budget so that you don't need to create then new institutions to have an oversight of this budget. That seems to me absolutely one of the key things to do. Second key thing to do is, you're talking about Eurozone reform, in my opinion, is to have also a Euro-safe asset the fastest as possible, so that the euro can play a role on the world market. The euro is a very good currency. It's used by everybody in daily life, in contracts, but not by investors. And that's because we don't have a real euro-safe asset the fastest as possible. And the third thing to do, in my opinion, economically, is absolutely the fastest as possible the completion of the single market. We have no single market in digital. We have no single market in capital. We have no single market in energy. And all these are in fact, the services of the future. Look to digital. All the big companies are American. It's time to create European champions, the fastest as possible, in all these new fields.
Thank you very much. Staying with the first point on Eurozone reform, Ska Keller, your manifesto rejects the failed austerity policies of the past and calls for an updated and reformulated Stability and Growth Pact. How would you update and reformulate it?
From our point of view, what we have seen in the recent years inside the European Union is indeed a very harsh austerity agenda, which has not been leading to growth and development at all. What we've rather seen is then when governments were trying to lightly at least overcome austerity, that then things have been moving. And we have a situation that, for example, in Greece, 37% of the young people are without employment. This is an unacceptable situation because it's not just an economical thing. This youth unemployment affects affects young people for the rest of their lives. If you start with no income, you will have a low income for the rest of your life. And it's also a democratic problem. If almost half of the young population is without any perspective for their future. So we need to indeed overcome this paradigm of austerity. It's also very interesting that Manfred Weber is now saying in Greece that, oh, we stop with this austerity as long as you elect me after all the previous German finance ministers from the Conservatives are totally pushing for austerity. So we need to have investment. Indeed, you were calling for, or you're asking for public investment. We totally agree with that. We need to create the jobs of the future, which are, for example, in climate-friendly technology. They are in the care sector, education system, and many more.
Thank you. Just very quickly, is it right that you are calling for the end of austerity? Did she characterize your view correctly?
I call for responsibility, and I tell you that the decisions to make the necessary reforms were agreed by all the relevant parties in the European Union. It was, for example, in the last 5 years, Moscovici, the Commissioner, was responsible. It was for more than 10 years a leadership under, well, 8 years, a leadership of the ECOFIN group from the Socialists who was responsible for the program approach. So we did our job and we stick to our job. We took over responsibility, and I think we all should do so, because I don't believe in that. And I don't believe in a non-reformed European Union. That's why the common approach was a common approach, and we have to stick to this.
Let's ask Frans Timmermans about the record of this Commission. And there's one particular point I want to ask you about. The same investment figures I quoted also show that private investment, net investment, has been growing since about 2012, 2013, but it's still only at the level it was at in 2011, still far below where it was before the 2008 crisis.
I see your tactic of always drawing me back into the Commission's record, but I'd really like to talk about my plans for the future, if you don't mind, because that's why we're here, I think. But to answer your question very quickly, the European Fund on Structural Investment has been a great, great success. It has opened opportunity, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises in many countries, especially this country and in France and in some other countries. And I think this was one of the most important decisions taken by the European Parliament on the instigation of the Socialists and Democrats, and it's worked extremely well. So that's a combination of public and private finance. I don't know where that would come in your scheme, but it is a success, as we can show clearly in the reports. Secondly, I want to say this. The most worrying thing I've read recently is a report by the IMF, where it says that the middle classes all over the Western world are dwindling. If we don't turn that around, if we don't give perspective to the middle class, solidarity will no longer be possible in our societies. So the first thing we need to do is to create responsible fiscal policies. It is unbearable that big companies are making billions of profits in Europe and paying no taxes. We need to change that immediately. We need to make sure that the incomes of the middle classes go up, and go up quickly. And we need to make sure that we have a rebirth of solidarity at the European level.
You have made your point.
Yeah, can I come back a little bit on the austerity issue? I think that we have to make the bridge there, that we have to end this discussion. In Europe, we are already now 10 years discussing austerity or no austerity. And at the end, we don't act. The Americans didn't have the discussion. After 9 months, after the start of the financial crisis, they started to have an investment fund of $900 billion. They have a troubled asset relief program to clean up the banks of $400 billion, and they did quantitative easing for more than $1 trillion. That's the way. Our problem is that with 28, that they have to decide on everything, we make no progress. So the best way to end austerity is, first of all, to solve that problem and to have a real common economic policy driven by Parliament and Commission, instead of 28 who can block everything, as we have seen in the Greek crisis also. That's the point.
I would like
and that's far more important than austerity, non-austerity. Is it Ferguson?
Thank you. You have made your point very well. I want to ask each of you the same question. Please try and keep it to 30 seconds. What is the main thing you will do to boost investment in the next 5 years as Commission President? A concrete policy idea that you think will lead to the greater investment that I think you all agree is desirable. Frans Timmermans.
I would concentrate all investments in creating as quickly as possible a circular economy, a sustainable economy, because the ones who make the transition to a sustainable economy first will have lesser cost and more profits more quickly. If we can make Europe more independent from fossil fuels, if we can assure that we are carbon neutral by 2050, we will create millions and millions of jobs.
Thank you. Ska Keller.
I would start by taking the money away from the 55 billion euros that we give every year to, indeed, fossil technology. That we should take away and put into renewable energy sustainable transport system, agriculture that is biological, and so on and so forth. And we should also really take care of the tax havens. And yes, Franz Timmermans, you talked very nicely about stopping all the tax evasion, but just yesterday you were talking with your friends in Malta, probably not about the tax evasion that is happening in Malta right now. So there we also need to have a clear stance from everyone. I mean, talk about it is nice, but we need to do it. We need to be coherent also in our own political families about what we want to achieve, and also not have a social democrat finance minister from Germany, so much your fault, blocking country by country transparency in the council. That is a disaster.
Thank you very much. Guy Verhofstadt.
I have a long list, but I will
only 30 seconds.
I have a long list, but I will only give one. But my main priority is a European digital regulator. One regulator in Europe. Because we are outdated in digital. 200 biggest companies worldwide, there is no 8 Europeans there are. 20 biggest companies in digital, no European. And that's because we have still 28 regulators. And that's the reason why Spotify, which is in fact a Swedish company, went first of all to New York to make profit and then came back. So I think really, instead of all these council meetings about digital and all these commissions about digital, one regulator, and we can pick up the fight on the digital and the technology.
Thank you. Manfred Weber.
I fully share the perspective of the digital market, but it is a broader perspective. You said you have a long list, and I want to expand it a little bit, because it is about really the single market as a whole. Because in the last 5 years, we have to be frank, we didn't do too much to create really a single market for all the services in today's European Union. And we saw when we created the single market of goods, we saw how profitable, how strong we can become when we do so. And that's why let's do the same for the services. I want to add innovation. It was not mentioned for the moment. To make concrete that innovation is in the profit of the people, let's do a master plan in fight against cancer. Let's give people hope what we can achieve together. And the third element, again, trade. We cannot be future-oriented if we are not in favor of trade.
We will return to
and let me add, because again, the socialists and Greens didn't support the trade agreement. That's why it's important to underline
We've had a range of ideas, which is good. And one of them, you focused, Franz Timmermans, on carbon neutrality targets, which allows us to move into our next topic, and it's time for that. The third topic is climate change and sustainability. Ska Keller, the Gilets jaunes protest movement was sparked by an increase in fuel taxes. There were many other grievances, but that was the spark. And that illustrated that it's people on lower incomes and people in poorer, more rural regions who stand to suffer from policies that make it more expensive to emit carbon. So how can you make the European economy more sustainable without making life harder for those already left behind?
Actually, it's the poorer people who are most hit by the climate crisis. It's them who live in densely populated streets where there's no cooling effect from trees, where they will be hit even worse by air pollution and heat waves. And it's also poorer people who have less CO2 emissions. Richer people have more. That's true globally as well as locally. But the problem is, indeed, Macron did everything wrong that you can possibly do wrong. First, he reduces or abolishes the tax for the super rich, and then he says, okay, let's do another tax on the, basically it's hit especially on the poor people, and especially looking at France, where you really don't have regional, local transport whatsoever. So this is not how we should do it. Another way how to do it, and that's just really one element, is have a CO2 price on every single CO2 ton that's being emitted, and then repay the income from that to each and every single citizen. So if you have a lower income and you have lower CO2 emissions, you will have a benefit, you will have a big plus on your account. If you earn more, and especially if you emit a lot of CO2, that will not be the case. Like this, you have social justice together with climate justice, because that's how it needs to go together. But we should not forget, we only have this one planet to live on, and we need to act now. We need to act fast.
Just to clarify your specific proposal, so you are suggesting carbon taxes, fuel taxes that are then redistributed on an equal basis to all citizens?
A CO2 price on every single CO2 ton that is being emitted, and then the extra income from that will be redistributed per citizen. There are already models in Switzerland.
Or at the European level?
Well, of course this should happen at the European level, but actually every single member state could go ahead with doing that. There is no excuse of not acting, because time is running. There's also other things we need to do. Have a mobility plan which looks at a train system throughout Europe. Get rid of those fossil fuels subsidies, which we're paying a lot of taxpayers' money on.
I want to bring in the others. You have had your time. Guy Verhofstadt, It says in your manifesto you want to extend the emissions trading system. Could you be clear that this means that you also want higher carbon taxes and to make carbon-intensive production and consumption more expensive?
I see carbon taxes as a possibility, and mainly a possibility not for the member states, but for the budget of the European Union. We need more own resources. We need to get rid of these national contributions who give all the power to member states and we are in fact killing the European budget and the European. So carbon taxes, yes. Secondly, when we talk about climate change, I want a more offensive and not this defensive way of looking to climate change. So for example, in our trade deals, let's go forward with the strategy of Cecilia Malmström the last years, that is to put in every of our trade deals, is it with Japan, is it with Canada, is it with Singapore, an anchor to the climate goals of Paris. And I want to say here, very openly, that's also needed, I think, in our debates with the Americans. And then finally, we need European champions. We missed the digital revolution a little bit in Europe, let's be honest. Well, we can create European champions on sustainability. Take, for example, batteries. Why could we not create the European champion on batteries so that this battery is used worldwide as the standard? So that is an offensive way, not always this defensive way of looking.
I would like you also to clarify a policy point on your green trade policy. Would you go as far as a policy some economists propose of border adjustment taxes on goods that are particularly polluting in the countries where they were produced, if they come from countries that have low standards?
When we make our trade deals, yes. But as a part of a trade deal, as a part of, okay, you can come in with these goods, but not with these or these, or you have in any way to pay something more because they are bad for the environment and bad for climate change. So Cecilia Malmström does that already. In every of these new trade deals she has made, she has an impressive record. She has put the climate change goals in it. And that's important to continue.
Thank you. Very quickly, 10 seconds, Ska Keller, your party also proposes carbon-based border adjustment taxes, is that right, in trade?
Yes, and it doesn't make any sense to put that in a trade agreement, actually, because you don't want to actually punish people that you're doing a trade deal with. You want to have it for every import. But what's more important is, if you agree that we should put the Paris Agreement into every trade agreement, then why did you not support it when we just had the vote on the TTIP vote, where we have been saying, let's not do that because Trump is getting out of the Paris Agreement, and the Liberals did not support it.
Thank you. 5 seconds.
It is in every of the trade deals that have been done the last year. Every time, with Japan, with Canada, with Singapore, and also now in preparation with Mexico, the Paris Climate
We don't need a list of all the countries. Manfred Weber, it's a similar question to you. You also promise, in your manifesto, you promise an effective carbon price and a well-functioning emissions trading system. Does that mean higher carbon taxes?
I believe in innovation. I believe, first of all, that innovation is the key element for solving the problems. We as Europeans, first of all, can be very proud about what we achieved. We are the front runners in the climate change activities to stop climate change on global level. Paris Agreement would have been impossible without the engagement of us as Europeans. And my party, yes, my party is the party who is trying to bring the balance, because I think you are right, that the Yellow Vest is a warning signal, that we have to do the change which is needed in our economy, in our technologies. We have to do these changes in a social acceptable way, and we have to do it also in a way that our industry can live with this. When you look to Poland, they have a lot of changes ahead of them. Then you have to do it in a way that everybody can live in this new carbon neutral world of the future, also the poor people. And again, I believe in innovation. That's my way to do things. But when I hear asking for higher taxation, especially for the European budget, I can agree on a lot of things what he said. But I must tell you that when I listen to what Rutte is telling me, and I tell you what the German FDP is telling me, that has nothing to do with what Guy Verhofstadt is telling us here today. And I try to present, and I present the EPP positions. That is probably the advantage to have not a top candidate. Then you can say whatever you want to say.
Let's now focus on what. Let's one. You actually have you have the highest time count of all the candidates. So I will ask you to defer.
Okay.
I want to involve Frans Timmermans.
Thank you.
I want to ask you the same Gilets jaunes challenge, which is how do you bring about carbon neutrality, a sustainable economy, without hurting those already most left behind?
Well, I want to say this. If we screw this up, none of us in this room can look our children in the eye anymore. If we screw this up, we screw it up for generations. So I know it's going to be painful, and we need to be honest about the fact that this transition is going to be painful. But we need to make it. Otherwise, the problems we will be facing will be out of control. And we can make it. We can have ecological and economic transformation into a sustainable world, but only if the majority of the people feel that this is socially sustainable. And that is where it went wrong in France, and it will go wrong everywhere if we could not give the guarantee that this is done in a socially sustainable way, which means that those who can bear the brunt, and those who can't won't have to. But everybody will have to adapt to this, from the most humble people to the richest people. But if we don't do it in a fair way, people will stop it, and then the consequences will be very, very dire for the whole of European society. So we need to take this issue directly to the people and tell them how urgent it is.
You will tell them how urgent it is, but what will you do to make it an easier burden to bear for the poorest?
Let's start with taxation. I spoke already. Big tech doesn't pay any taxes. You know, I would like to switch on Alexa and say to Alexa, Alexa, when is Amazon going to pay taxes? Would be nice to get a good answer on that. They're not paying taxes.
And you will use this to compensate.
And what we could do is to have, first of all, taxes. Why don't they pay taxes? You know, a corner shop here pays tax. Why don't they? Secondly, we need a carbon tax. A carbon tax, I would say, at the European level, and you could dedicate what comes in on the carbon tax for transition of the economy and also make it socially sustainable. You could use that money, for instance, to create housing all across Europe that is sustainable.
We'll stop at the proposal for a carbon tax. And you will not believe this, but because you will all think that you have spoken the least, but you are more or less equal by now. Not quite, and I will try to continue to rebalance. But we have come to the middle of our program, where we'll try to solicit questions. First one from the audience, and then one from the outside world through the magic of the internet. But let me start by seeing if I can take one. There are lots of people. Anybody else? Because I think I saw you waving your hand first here. Please say who you are and be very succinct.
Yes, hello. My name is Sebastian Mastoric. I'm a first-year Hugh researcher here at the EY. I would like to know from you, you all claim to be in favor of re-democratizing Europe. So I wanted to ask you if you are in favor of introducing the legislative initiative to the European Parliament, and if you think that the European Parliament has the legitimacy to deserve that right, given the chronically low turnout that it usually has at the elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is a question about governing Europe and democratizing Europe. You will all have 1 minute to answer the question. Let's start at that end.
Well, I fully support that in the future treaties we give the right of initiative towards the European Parliament, no doubt about this. But I want to already act now. As possible next Commission President, I promise that I will accept all the initiatives from the next European Parliament, and I will put them in a quasi-automatic process as a legislative initiative on the table. So an indirect initiative right for the European Parliament can already be installed in the next mandate. And I want to go further because, you know, the principle behind is that in democracy we talk about transparency. People must know who are the personalities, and what is the program behind. That is the basic principle of democracy, these two pillars. And my party presented me as a candidate, and you know, I had already a competition in my party. I think we were the only party, the EPP, who had an internal competition with Alex Stubb in Helsinki, where we had a secret ballot, and then we came out with a candidate. And the others can also compete with democracies, no doubt about this. But we did this already in the party. And we want to do this also now on European level, to strengthen European democracy. And that's why I cannot understand why the Liberals are now taking the concept of presenting a candidate into question when they, on the other hand, cannot achieve a further step. So let's keep what we have achieved already in our hands.
But we have news here. That is that the PPE finally agrees again with the transnational lists. Not bad. There is only one problem. We did already agree in 2015 on that. And then they broke their agreement. So, but to look at it in a positive way, I'm pleased that now we can have the transnational list in the next Commission program. Second, yes to the legislative initiative, but I want to add one additional element. That is also that there is a need for the European Parliament to be fully responsible for the budget. Not only for the expenditures, also for the income. Sorry, we are the only parliament worldwide who cannot decide on the income. Normally we say no taxation without representation. Right? You could also say the opposite. Why you have a parliament? That is to control the income of the executive. So that is for me at least as important as the legislative initiative.
Thank you very much. Ska Keller.
Yes to legislative initiatives, yes to transnational list, yes to budget, but also a big problem that we have is the intransparency in the Council. We urgently need to know as citizens of our respective member states how our member states are voting on issues in the Council. We don't know that. That needs to be clear. But I actually think the biggest danger that right now we have to European democracy is the lack of rule of law and civil liberties in the member state. There we have a big problem. We need to act because the European citizens are expecting also that they can experience their civil liberties everywhere, and we see really an erosion of that happening in Hungary and Poland, but also in Romania and many other countries. So there we really need to act quickly.
Thank you. Frans Timmermans.
Yes, I think in a future treaty change we will have to look at the relationships between the institutions, including the right to initiative of the European Parliament. But I want to take issue with what Guy Verhofstadt said. 5 years ago he said, if you kill the Spitzenkandidaten system, you close the door on European democracy. Now he's entitled to change his mind about that. But to change your mind about something so fundamental, he'll have to explain that himself. But the most important thing here is not whether the European electorate has a direct influence. The most important thing is that you gave the European Parliament a unique position in deciding on who leads the next Commission. And if you take that away from the European Parliament, you take away something that has become very important, because I've had this experience in the last 5 years. The relationship between the Commission and the European Parliament has not been as close in the last 5 years as before. Closer than ever before, with more concrete successes together than ever before. The odd man out here is the Council. I think we can, all four of us, agree on that. The odd man here is the Council.
On that, yes. We have a common enemy.
Thank you. Now,
you are sitting a few in the...
Ska Keller has been most disciplined with her time, which is why I want to follow up on something you said about increasing transparency in the Council. How? Concretely.
Very easily, the Council could simply publish the results of each vote. Which country voted for an amendment, which country voted against, which country has tabled that amendment. No problem, it's possible. They sometimes they do it, but usually you don't know about the nitty-gritty things, you don't know that.
That's not the point. That's not the point, it's public, sorry.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's
the result of a vote is public, but you don't know.
It should be better to put a camera in the Council.
Please let Ska Keller finish.
Well, I wouldn't mind a camera in the Council, definitely not. But I don't think it's even necessary. I mean, they can have, there is some secret behind the door talks, sure, but I do want to know what has one government proposed, how did the others relate to that, and that is not public, and that needs to be, because also when we are negotiating with the Council in trilogue, we're always at a loss because we don't even know how strong the majorities were in the Council. The Presidency says no, and maybe it was a tight majority, so that needs to change, and that is possible from tomorrow on.
So this means more detailed minutes with more details on the votes. Just concretely, that's what it means.
Yes, I want to know which government votes for what or against what, all the time.
Simply do it public.
First, are you seriously proposing to have Council meetings in open session?
Make them completely public with a camera, like it is the case with the Parliament, because in fact the European Council has to become the Senate of the Member States and not longer the body as it is today. And you know what?
So you commit to this? This is a commitment.
And the second most important problem is the unanimity rule in the Council. If you end the unanimity rule in the Council in all sectors, including foreign policy, then we will have, I think, a more active Council, because the most of the fights we are discussing here are blocked in the Council.
Thank you. Frans Timmermans, as somebody who has worked in the Commission as a Commissioner, what do you think of these proposals?
I think more transparency in the Council is fine. I would be in favour of that. I would also like more transparency in the European Parliament. Frankly, the European Parliament, at least Mr. Weber's group, refuses to have mandatory registration of lobbyists in the European Parliament. We have strong support for the Greens for that. The Liberals are more or less on board, but we don't have a majority for that. And the Commission already committed to that. It's about time the European Parliament showed clearly which lobbyists have access to members of Parliament.
Thank you.
But again,
the centre-right has spent more time than the centre-left, so we're going to move on to the next question, which will be from social media or the internet. Now, Christy, would you like to give us a question?
Thank you very much. So Paul Friesvold is asking, will the new EU leadership establish new models for a multi-speed Europe? For instance, allowing even further integration with other countries like Switzerland, Norway and the UK.
Thank you very much. Another question of EU governance.
But not to speed Europe, was it? We have
that. Should the next Commission, the next EU leadership promote, facilitate new modes or more expansive modes of multi-speed Europe? Ska Keller, you are still in the lead in terms of time discipline, so why don't you answer the question first?
Do I? Well, there is instruments that we can use already now, like the enhanced cooperation, which is, by the way, something that I would very much propose in the refugee policy. There's governments who are saying, no, we can't act because Hungary doesn't want to go along. Yeah, then just act, go along, find a club of 20 countries that want to go ahead and do it. So enhanced cooperation, yes. But what we're not supporting is a Europe where you have a core and the periphery. No, that we're not supporting. We want to hold the European Union together. We all have a role on this, and the UK is still a member of that, and hopefully it will still stay a bit longer. But no, we don't want to have Europe drifting apart. We want to hold it together.
I must admit I'm a little bit confused, because on the one hand you say yes to enhanced cooperation wherever there is a group of willing countries. On the other hand, you don't want a core and a periphery. How do you avoid one without? How do you avoid
very
one
easy.
when you
You follow the EU laws and treaties, and enhanced cooperation is a very normal framework that we have. And sure, it would be better if everyone would go ahead, but enhanced cooperation, we do that, for example, in the field of same-sex couple marriage and their divorce issues. So there we have enhanced cooperation. It's under the EU framework. It's regulated inside the EU. Whereas multi-speed core, periphery, that's outside. That's a completely new thing, and it's just meant to keep the periphery out, and I don't want to do that.
Kiefer Hofstad.
Well, I'm against, in fact, going further into a multi-speed Europe because we have already 28 different speeds in the European Union. The Union is too far with the opt-ins and the opt-outs and the exceptions and the enhanced cooperation, a sort of a menu card of a restaurant. You enter and you say, oh, I like this, I don't like Schengen, I don't like the euro. That cannot continue. On the other hand, I'm in favor for two circles in the European Union. That you have a first circle, that is the Union as such, in which all member states have to participate in all policies. And then a second circle, who are the association agreements. That is what we have, or what we should have with Norway, what we should have with Switzerland, and also with Britain. It's foreseen in the text and in the proposal of the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration that we have managed with them. So, two circles, the inner circle, everybody has to participate in the mid and the long term, and then a circle outside that are countries, that can be Ukraine, that can be Britain, that can be Switzerland, who have an association with the European Union. But not further splitting up with opt-ins and opt-outs. It's completely incomprehensible.
Am I right in seeing these as diametrically opposed views? Enhanced cooperation and patchwork within EU law?
No, I don't want patchwork. I've said twice already, I don't want patchwork. I want to have the European Union together, but we can use the instruments that we have. One of them is enhanced cooperation, but only in a small area, definitely. Europe stays together.
But not two circles?
Not two circles.
Can you imagine that in the United States of America, there is one of these states who is saying, oh, I don't apply the dollar, I don't apply the border and coast guard. That's completely ridiculous.
But in Guy's model, you would no longer be able to differentiate within the European Union, I understand.
The midterm has to be to finish that.
But I think I prefer a system where you don't have two tracks, you have one track, but not everybody moves at the same speed on that one track, so that you give countries who are able and willing to go faster, and others give them the opportunity to catch up later. This has worked well in certain areas, and this could also work well in other areas. I would prefer that to the system of two different circles, because once you're in the second circle, you probably will never get in the first circle again, and I think we should continue unlike some people in my country, I think we should continue to work towards an ever closer union. And to have different speeds of integration could help, paradoxically, to bring ever closer union closer to
but
us.
it is also disintegrating at a certain moment. European arrest warrant in Italy, it has taken 10 years before the European arrest warrant was applicable here in this country. Because Mr. Berlusconi thought that we would apply on him.
Let's hear the answer.
Well, the problem of the European arrest warrant is not this. The problem of the European arrest warrant is that the rule of law is undermined in some member states, so that cooperation on the basis of the European arrest warrant is no longer possible. That's a much bigger problem.
Thank you very much. Manfred Weber.
Having the global dimension in mind for the question of Paul, is Donald Trump, is Vladimir Putin, with the Chinese as new challenger for us. I think we all must do our best to keep Europe together. That must be our general goal. Keep Europe together, otherwise we are lost. We cannot be successful in this globalized world. And having this in mind, that's why I wouldn't ask for any kind of split up. On the other hand, I must tell you, having some populist government in Europe in mind, I am not anymore accepting that some members of the Council are blocking the future initiatives of our continent. We have to speed up. We are losing time. That's why we need engagement. That are the two sides, and that's why we have to identify case by case what are we doing now. On the Brexit, let me say, I will do whatever I can do to try to keep Great Britain on board. Because this was a wrong decision. Full stop, it was a wrong decision. But on the other hand, I want to do my best, whatever I can do, to not allow that we are occupied only by the Brexit debate for more than 3 years now, and we continue this tragedy. We don't allow that they are occupying too much space of our future debate for Europe.
Thank you very much. I want to move on to the next topic. We will have another round of questions from the audience and from the internet. But let's move on to the next topic, which is security. When Europeans are asked about the greatest threat facing Europe, terrorism is high on many people's minds, but it's not the only threat people mention. So for some, security is about digital security. For others, it's about crime. For others, again, it may be acts by foreign powers or political extremism within Europe. So this time I want to ask the same question of all of you, which is, how do you define the greatest threat to the security of Europeans? Is it terrorism? Is it something else? And how do you propose to combat this threat should you head the next Commission? Manfred Weber.
I think it's very difficult to prioritize the threats which we are ahead of us. So terrorism, we were in Strasbourg in the last plenary in December last year when the terror attack in Strasbourg happened, that took place. So you cannot prioritize. It's a common challenge to guarantee security. That's why I'm in favor of a strongly upgraded FPA for the European Union, with own rights to make investigations inside of the European Union. And the biggest challenge for us is to really make it accessible for all our police forces in the European Union to have the same database. It's unacceptable that some French data are not accessible for the Austrians or for the Hungarians. We have to create a real European database. That means that Schengen, for example, the Schengen information system must be in the future mandatory to include the data you have as on national level. And let me add, that's a cyber question, the cyber threat, the security in the internet field, can be a starting point for a real European defense pillar, because it's a modern form of defense. It's a cyber war question. I would ask for installing and creating a real cyber defense brigade on European level, where we combine our intelligent people who can really identify the threats and can protect the European internet infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Ska Keller.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would like to see all my data being transferred to the Hungarian authorities, but that's just On the other hand, I think security really is an important issue. We need to think it as human security, the safety and security of human beings, of the people living inside the European Union. And we need to think it very broadly. So I agree we need to act against cyber attacks, and we also need to think about the security of our infrastructure. And that has been a bit of a debate that came a bit late. I mean, we have been setting the standards, for example, in data safety. Let's not call it privacy, let's call it data safety, because that's also what it is. And one of the proposals that we had there on the table, that we also have security standards for telecommunication providers. Unfortunately, the right side of the House here present did not support that, because you were saying that's an undue influence and burden on the industry. But right now we have the same industry coming to us and saying, let's please have security minimum standards. I really do think we still need that, and we need it more than ever, so that we can make sure that our critical infrastructure also stays in public European hand, and let's not take the cheap Chinese option just because it's cheap.
So that means no Huawei?
Yes.
Well, I think if you talk about security, you need to face the new reality that we now, for the first time in living memory, have an American president who believes that a weak and divided Europe is in his interest, which means that we will need to depend on each other much more than in the past. Secondly, we have a Russian president who's used many, many methods in the last years to try and weaken European democracies, to try and influence our elections, to try and spread lies and myths that weaken our societies. So that, I believe, these are the biggest threats to our security. First of all, we need to reinvigorate European security cooperation as a means to reinvigorate NATO. Only by taking more responsibility ourselves for our collective security can we re-engage with the Americans in a constructive way and sort of wait out until 2020 and hope for a different decision by the American people. And then, as far as Russia is concerned, we don't have to be obsessed, but we don't have to be naive either. There is a concerted effort in trying to weaken our democracies by supporting populist right-wing parties, by spreading fake news, by doing all these things, and Europe needs to get tough on countering that, and that will have to be done also through education, through explanation. I believe those are our biggest security threats.
Guy Verhofstadt.
I have the same priorities as the others and three concrete proposals. The first is European FBI. Let's upgrade Europol so that they can investigate, and we have European FBI because we have seen in the terrorist attacks that always one country had some information that was not shared, and the only way to solve that, European FBI. Secondly, digital security. I agree with what has been said. It has to be the public authorities, the European level, that we have to define the rules, and it's not Facebook themselves with their 20,000 scrutineers working in India who have to say, oh, this Facebook page is allowed and this is not. It's a public task. As a liberal, I tell you, it's a public task. And then three, European army. European army, I think this is the biggest waste of money in the European Union, is the military, the way we organize it. We spend nearly half of the Americans. We spend 3 times more than the Russians on military in Europe. But I'm not sure, as the Russians come this way, that we are capable to stop them. So what I think we have to do is really a European army. And I believe that it is possible. A European army of 20,000 people.
Thank you.
2024, why not? Let's do it, instead of thinking that Trump will always enter and help us when it is needed.
Thank you very much. So from the centre-right, the left of the stage, both of you talked about a European FBI. Can we hear what the Party of European Socialists and the European Green Party think about that idea?
I think, as long as we cannot depend fully on the integrity of European security and services and European justice services across the European Union, there is no point in trying to create a European FBI. We need to clean up our act in the member states first. And already through Europol, Eurojust, we have quite good, very professional instruments that can do a lot of the task. I think, to come up with an icon like a European FBI, we are not the United States. We are organized differently. And I don't think, super police is the answer for Europe's problem.
Thank you. Ska Keller.
Well, I do think we need to strengthen our cooperation because indeed a lot of information gets lost and we need to work together cross borders. We need to act more. So yes, a model of the FBI. Yes, with human rights guarantees and civil liberties and everything. Yes, to that. No to a European CIA.
But we were talking about the FBI, not about the CIA.
It's an important difference.
So yes, FBI, no CIA.
Let's make a success of the public prosecutor, and then we can see where we take it from there.
Guy Verhofstadt also proposed a European army. You proposed increased European military cooperation, if I understood you right. Does that mean a European army?
We don't overpromise. There's not going to be a European army anytime soon. What we can do from the European Union is to make sure that we change our industry policy, that we have an armaments industry that is working together much more, and then we can start specializing our armed forces, do what they're good at, and then when they do what they're good at, cooperation will increase. But don't, come up with European army. It's not going to happen anytime soon.
Manfred Weber, European army? Manfred Weber.
So I think we should have also great visions for the future. And I tell you, in my party, in the CSU in Bavaria, the first program we made included the idea of a European army. It's the fundamental idea to never have war again in Europe. It's today not thinkable, but with a common European army it would be totally unthinkable. And that is, I think, one of the reasons for strengthening the European defense pillar. Let's act now, but I would say let's act with concrete projects. So with cyber war brigade, with a drones brigade, so in the modern fields of defense, let's start with such initiatives.
But how can we get there? If the French president puts an interesting plan on the table for more economic cooperation, for more integration, and the only thing he gets back from Germany, we want an aircraft carrier and we want you to leave Strasbourg, the European Parliament. I mean, that is not the way we're going to get this thing working. We need also the German government to commit to a cooperation that starts where it hurts today in Europe, and it hurts in the economy, and it hurts with workers, and it hurts in the need to make the transition to a sustainable society.
Thank you. Ska Keller, a European army?
I agree with cooperation for the defense sector, absolutely. And this should indeed lead to a saving of money, because we spend ridiculous amounts on creating all sorts of army projects. Now, what happens, though, is that we have a European Defense Fund with 13 billion euros, which will just add more on top. And I would say that the defense sector is probably not the poorest and, you know, the littlest industry sector that we have. So I think we should be wise and save money by cooperation. And on the European army, I would have some question. Who sends the army?
Exactly.
President or Parliament? What about the nuclear weapons? Because we don't want any.
Guy Verhofstadt.
Exactly. Well, I think that what Frans is saying is more of the same. We have an inflation of bilateral cooperations inside the European Union between all member states. We have the so-called European battle groups with a joke, with a piece of paper in the bureau, in the office of Mrs. Mogherini, and it's never used today. So if we want really to solve problems, let's go back to the Founding Fathers. Their first idea of the Founding Fathers, what it was a European defense community in the 50s. And it were the French who voted it down in the Assembly in 54. For the first time that the French now are changing their idea. And are saying, let's do, in fact, a European army, and the Germans are embracing this idea. I think it's the moment to get forward. Because again, Frans, you are saying, yeah, but I don't trust Trump. Well, then you have to take your own responsibility.
Can I ask a reality check question? Give me the list of national parliaments who will give out of their hands the decision on sending troops into harm's way. Give me that list.
No, but may I also
Manfred Weber wants to take a reality check.
Because when Frans is arguing in this way, who is ready to do so? I tell you, in the 19th, Helmut Kohl and Mitterrand agreed to do the euro. And when you would have asked them, national parliaments, whether they are ready to do so, a lot of them would have been very skeptical about the proposal. Exactly. So what Europe needs is leadership. That is what Europe needs, and that's why to strengthen the defense pillar is a key issue in this field. I tell you, that is one of the reasons for the growing populism, because we have no fascinating, strong ideas anymore from the center of the landscape. The left and right extremists are dominating the political agenda and not anymore the center. And that's why let's try also to create, again, dreams for the future. And one of the dreams is to create a European defense.
Can I please get an answer to my question? I put a very clear question.
Very quickly from Ska Keller.
A European army. You are still thinking.
You have made your point. I would like to hear from Ska Keller.
I agree very much about dreaming big, but if the one big dream for Europe is an army, I'm sorry.
No. Let's move on to the related fifth topic, which is EU foreign policy. And let's continue with Ska Keller. Your manifesto has much detail, but it doesn't mention the word China, nor the word Russia, nor the word Africa. Tell us what a Green Party European foreign policy is.
Our foreign policy should be coherent and therefore coherent everywhere. And our foreign policy, we believe, should be based on human rights and on democracy. That is what we should be based on. And one of the big problems that we have right now is that we don't have a consistent and coherent policy on anything. foreign or even inside. And that is a big problem that needs to change. So we want to be consistent in that. We want to apply our internal values to the outside. So that relates, for example, to the weapons exports. I already mentioned that. Let's stop the weapons exports. Let's follow the rules that we actually already have. We need to have a European weapons exports control agency that looks at whether the criteria for the weapons exports are actually fulfilled. And, for example, to Saudi Arabia, they're definitely not. I mean, religious minorities are suppressed there. They're bombing the Yemen, creating a lot of harm and dying. We should not do that. We should have a development policy that follows the ideas of the Sustainable Development Goals, because right now they're not. Right now we're having a fishery policy that leaves fishermen and women unemployed. Right now we're dumping our leftover agricultural products in the world. That will make farmers unemployed, and then we're wondering why they're standing, at our front door. So we need to be coherent, consistent, also vis-à-vis China. Be careful, we mentioned the Huawei issue already, but also insist on human rights, also when talking with China, especially when talking with China, because things have been getting really, really bad there.
Thank you. Manfred Weber, in your manifesto under the global heading, you say that you want to build a true energy union to make sure no external power can undermine our energy security. And the country that obviously comes to mind in that regard is Russia. So could you tell us what your policy will be vis-à-vis Russia, specifically where you stand on Nord Stream 2, but more generally, what European policy towards Russia should be?
Well, the position of the EPP is crystal clear. We are not in favor of Nord Stream 2. We think it is increasing the dependence towards Russian gas and not decreasing it. And that's why we don't think that this is a good project for the future. And generally speaking, on the question of Russia, it gives us a clear indication that foreign policy of the European Union must be based on our values and not on the economic interests. When I have my talks with the Ukraine friends in mind, with the young people who were in the Maidan and demonstrated for their freedom, for democracy, for the rule of law principle, there is no doubt that Europe has to stand next to these young people, to the generation who wants to live like we can live. A second element I want to add is Venezuela. We have now the news in mind. It took us 4 weeks of time to come to a conclusion on the Venezuela sanctions or not, on the Venezuela actions or not. It's a tragedy to see that a country like Italy was part of this, and also Greece. We had a problem to come to a common understanding that the whole continent can act on on foreign affairs. That is a tragedy. That's why stop unanimous vote, come to majority decision-making process in foreign affairs. It's crucial. And the last element, I think we have to clarify our neighborhood policy. I think Turkey is a close partner. We have to invest in partnership, but Turkey cannot become a member of the European Union. And I think now it's a moment to clarify this, to be honest to each other.
Thank you. Frans Timmermans, if you were Commission President, how would you approach President Donald Trump? In particular, what would you offer him to make him remove the threat of car tariffs? But more generally, what should EU foreign policy towards the US under Trump?
The only way we can confront President Trump is by being united as Europeans. If we are divided as Europeans, he wins. If we are united as Europeans, we are stronger than he is. And this is a reality that is very important in commercial matters. It's also very important in other global matters. It's as simple as that. I, as Commission President, would gladly confront him. But if the Member States don't have my back, it's only for show. Only if the Member States unite on a policy that stands for our values can we confront the Americans and convince them to also have an agreement based on those values. But, it's interesting to talk about foreign policy and the lack of agreement on foreign policy. How can you talk about a European army if you can't even agree on foreign policy? An army is an instrument in the hands of foreign policy, not the other way around. So we need to work first and foremost on creating more consensus on foreign policy on the things that matter. And I would concentrate on 2 issues. One is the East of the European Union. We have a huge task in creating stability in Ukraine and in the Western Balkans. We should not neglect that. The other one is Africa. We need a strategy for Africa that is epic, that is of a size that we haven't seen before. For that, we need much more money, and the budget will have to accommodate for that. If we do not make that choice, Africa will come to us to claim what they deserve, namely a fair share in the world's wealth. And if we bring it to them, they will be able to transform that continent into a wealthy and stable partner of the European Union.
Just a very quick clarification, 10 seconds, you talk about consensus. Do you agree with removing unanimity, doing more majority voting in foreign policy questions?
Having been foreign minister, I can tell you that unanimity is not the big problem there. Even with qualified majority voting, if you then don't have an agreement, the member state that doesn't agree will do its own policy anyway. Legislation, yes, there you need QMV. But in policy, in foreign policy, QMV is not the solution for our problems, frankly.
I want to pick up on Africa quickly before we come to you, Mr. Verhofstadt, because you also call for a Marshall Plan for Africa, Manfred Weber. Is this a policy that's also shared by the Liberals and the Greens? A huge financial effort towards Africa?
Well, financial effort for sure, but it needs to be in a partnership. And how about we talk about the colonial debt that we have acquired here in this continent that we need to do better at. We need to respect African countries, also not just talk about Africa. You know, there's huge differences in Africa. I mean, Africa is not a country, it's a continent, and there's differences, and we need to look at them. And again, we need to have a foreign policy that's coherent and that's consistent, and that is based very much so on our European values, based on human rights. And we should not enter a competition about who puts more money in, like, is it China or us? Because the question is, for what are we doing? And again, it's about fair trade, for example. It's about fairness with each other and not pumping money somewhere, dealing with a dictator like in Sudan to stop refugees from coming. That's not a fair partnership.
Thank you. Guy Verhofstadt, could you address the Africa question first?
Well, I think that you have to be serious with Africa, and the only way to be serious with Africa is to start negotiations with them, with the African Union and the European Union on one common trade area. That's the only way to really do something positive for Africa. Not by starting to give some gifts and try to compete with the Chinese, is really to say you can enter with your products on our markets and vice versa. And a big deal between the European Union and the African Union should be a priority, I think, for the coming 4 years. That said, I'm not in agreement on another point with France, if I can use this. It's because you have a common army that you're going to create common positions in foreign policy. That's the opposite in reality. It's, you have seen that. I have lived that myself when I was a member of the European Council, when the Iraq war started. The discussion in the European Council, it was in Spain somewhere, in 2004, I think, has taken 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That was the discussion about the position of the European Union on Iraq, because it was not necessary to have a common position. One army cooperated with the Americans, other armies in Europe didn't cooperate, and that is the fundamental change that we have to make. That's the reason why the founding fathers also knew from day one that the common army is a basis for a common policy, and not the opposite.
Neighbourhood policy came up, and Africa is in some sort of neighbourhood policy. And it will soon happen, probably, that relations with Britain will also be part of EU foreign policy. That's a big change of affairs. I'm not sure of anything.
You know more than we do.
But let's see. So I want to continue with you, Guy Verhofstadt, because you've been engaged with Brexit from the Parliament side. The FT reports today that Theresa May is now considering going for a customs union to get agreement with Labour. And if it's in the FT, it must be true. So on that assumption, if Britain, after Brexit, for the future relationship, proposed to stay in a customs union, do regulatory alignment of the sort that's already been proposed for goods, is a sort of free movement of goods only solution possible?
I think that a customs arrangement around these lines is possible. We have always said that in the political declaration we were ready to go further than what is foreseen now. So also in the territory of a customs union or a customs arrangement. That is absolutely not the problem. The problem for the moment is, will there be a deal between cross-party? And I hope that there is a deal, because I personally think that the decision of the European Council was not the most intelligent one that has been taken a few weeks ago. To go
the 6 month delay.
Yeah, to 6 months. And by doing that, importing, in fact, the mess in British politics, and you can say there is a little bit of mess in British politics, into the European elections. And that is my fear. So I hope, in a miracle, I never have trust in a miracle, but at this time I hope really in a miracle that in the coming days, next week, this deal is done between the two cross-party, and that we can end this fight after 3 years.
But Manfred Weber, I think you were nodding in agreement about the 6-month extension being a bad idea or unintelligent idea, so let's hear what you think about that. But more broadly, the same question about the future relationship. If the UK is ready to go for a customs union, is some sort of frictionless trade in goods solution, 1 or 2 freedoms, if you like, possible?
You know, it's the big tragedy behind the development is that the model to be close to the European Union but not membership is not a new innovative idea by the British people. Huh? We have it with Switzerland, we have it with Norway, we have it already, Turkey. So the question is simply, please choose. Huh? You have offers on the table, please choose. And the problem is that they cannot decide about the option, what they want to choose, and hopefully they will do now. One additional element is for me extremely important in the whole talks, because we have to underline to the citizens it is a bad decision to leave, that's obvious, but we as Europeans, we know what we have to defend. No border in Northern Ireland, the freedom of movement as a principle in Europe, such a big achievement that we all can choose where we want to live in Europe, where we are free citizens, is such a big achievement of Europe. That is what we defended in the negotiations, and I think we can be proud of this, about what we did there in these negotiations. And the main message in regard to the elections is, don't follow them. The Brexit case is a negative example. It's better to reform Europe than to leave or even destroy Europe.
Thank you very much. You're again roughly balanced in time, so I would like to move on to our next round of questions from the audience in the room and online.
No Brexit.
No Brexit for us.
It's, you know, there's a question of whether there's too much Brexit in a European election.
I just, you know, whatever is being said, I will keep on hoping till the last day that Britain changes its mind and stays. I would love them to stay. That is what I hope. If Guy Verhofstadt can change his mind on a lead candidate, surely the British public should get a chance to express their opinion again in a referendum.
Ska Keller, just as quickly, please.
The Brits weren't asked what sort of exit they want. They were only asked in or out, and they were asked that on false preconditions. Money was being misused. So yes, they should be given a second chance to have a decision about which Brexit or whether indeed they have changed their minds. And if that happens, then we should welcome them with open hearts, with open minds and open doors back where they belong into the European Union.
There no be a misunderstanding. I hope also that Britain will return. There will be a next generation who will return to the European Union. I'm pretty sure of this, but I don't think that we have to interfere now in their choices that they have made in their referendum. That's the wrong thing. That's bad policy by the European Union.
Now that everyone's had a short say on Brexit, let's have one more question from the audience. Yes, please. Sorry, the lady here.
Thank you very much. Tanya Cox I'm the director of Concord. Political scientists are warning that the enormous economic inequality that has been created by the economic system is going to cause political upheaval in developed countries in the near future, in the coming years. Could you tell us what you're going to do to address the economic system and to address the inequalities that it's creating? How are you going to reduce these inequalities between people and between countries? Thank you.
Thank you. So this is an excellent and big question that happens in the part of the debate where you have all agreed to take 30 seconds to answer. So be very concise. Frans Timmermans, do you want to start?
Well, like in any industrial revolution, this one also needs a policy of redistribution. Because now you have a few winners who make billions of profits and pay no taxes, and you have many people who feel they lose out. So that needs to be corrected. Traditionally, member states were big enough to correct that on their own. That's why we have the social welfare state on a national level. In this economy, in this world, this no longer works. So you need the European scale to do that. And this is what we need to do urgently. In fiscal policies and social policies, restore the role of trade unions so that they can negotiate decent salaries and make sure we make the transition to a circular economy. That is the fastest I can answer your question.
Thank you. Manfred Weber.
The fears are there in our society, and they are a driving element for populism and extremism. The truck driver who is listening in the radio that there is an innovation of a self-driving truck ahead of us is creating a lot of fears among citizens, these innovations. And that's why we have to be clear that we need a taxation for the digital giants, where we can also then spend money for a kind of a digital transition fund for the future, that we give the people a perspective. There is a need of taxation in this field, absolutely. I share this. But I must also underline that the fiscal and social policy is mainly today, and that's why I don't want to create too much expectations from us, from the leaders for the European elections, is mainly national policy. That's why we have to work closely together with our colleagues on national level to find a new approach for equal treatment of our citizens.
Thank you.
So you want a European army, but not European fiscal policy.
Keller.
I think there's a contradiction there.
Ska Keller.
Well, your question was actually related to the global scale, right? And you were asking about that. And I think my 38 seconds answer to that would be policy coherence for a sustainable development, making sure that our policies are coherent. If we really want to support other countries in development, let's make sure that we're not a tax haven, a money laundering place. Let's make sure that dictators cannot wash their money here. Let's make sure that we're not teaming up with dictators elsewhere just to stop refugees and then totally forget human rights and social issues. Let's make sure that all our policies targeted or dealing with developing countries are fair and always look also at the social areas as highlighted in the Sustainable Development Goals.
The question is here what we can do on the European level, I think, and not specific on national level. European level, I see, first of all, the flexicurity is in fact have good results in the Scandinavian countries to roll it out further in the rest of Europe. I think we can stimulate that. The second is the idea of the basic income. Even that basic income idea is absolutely necessary as the basis for a social policy in the European Union, because the profits have also to return to the ordinary people. And then thirdly, I think we need in the digital economy something special. And effectively, I think that Frans is right there, the American monopolists in digital have to pay their taxes. They don't do. And the best way to do that is that the data, that we own our own data. Because now we send them their data and they are making profits with all data. That has to stop.
Let's now get a question from online. Maria, do you have a question?
Thank you. So we have a question from a British educated Dutchman living in Luxembourg.
Hola, that exists.
Who is asking, if there is one power the EU could be given today that it does not yet have, what would that be? And if there is one area where the EU should be doing less or nothing at all, what would that be and why?
Thank you very much. Excellent question. Is there a power the EU doesn't have that it should have, and is there perhaps a power it has that it shouldn't have, is how I hear the question. Ska Keller.
Well, I think if I have to pick one, then I think for me the next level for the European Union is to create a social Europe, to make sure that the social targets are not just non-binding niceties, Sunday talk, but that they're actually being put into real action. And on things that the European Union shouldn't be doing, well, I really can't think of any. I mean, yes, subsidiarity is key, taking decisions as close as possible to the citizens. But many challenges of today are on a broader scale, and they need to go together. For example, fighting the climate crisis needs to be done at the European Union level, but every community can and will have to do their share, so all the levels need to do together, and that's why we're also calling for a federal republic in Europe, where all the areas of Europe can work nicely together.
Thank you. Guy Verhofstadt.
Well, I think that the main thing that we have to do is that we give the power to Europe to decide and to create the standards in the future economy. On digital, where we are absent, I have given you the figures. On energy, where we are absent also, because the energy union is still not there. On capital markets, where we are not there. And also, I agree with Ska, this basis of a social security model that can be a basis in the whole European Union. That often, and less, it's very clear. In a certain way, less regulation, less bureaucracy. Our internal market in Europe is more managed, is more regulated, in fact, than the American market. And there we could do better by skipping a number of these regulations.
Do you want to compare with them?
Well, the point where we have to consider to reduce a little bit our engagement as European Union, I must say that I experience in my talks all over Europe that people are really a little bit fed up about the bureaucracy, about red tape. That is a daily reality for farmers, of a lot of company owners. That is a reality. That's why I think we have to be clear on the framework, there I share it, But on the other hand, Europe must also respect the national level, the local level even, on our democratically elected colleagues on this level, to do then finally the implementation. So give more freedom, give more space for those who are implementing finally. And the thing where we have to do more, for me it's clear, it's foreign affairs. The only chance to survive as our European way of life, to defend our principles in a globalized world, is to organize unity, and that's why the decision-making process must be changed.
Very clear. Thank you. Frans Timmermans.
If I accept your premise, the point the lady made first, Ms. Cox, I think your name is, that if we do not change certain things, our democracies will be threatened directly by the economic model we have now. So my highest feeling of urgency is to change the economic model. And I think we need a minimum wage in every single member state of the European Union. I think we need European fiscal policies to correct the abomination that biggest companies don't pay taxes. Member states on their own can't do that anymore. And on what we could do less, well, Manfred Weber has promised us 1,000 rules less. I'm really curious to get his list of the rules. I've been working on this issue for the last 10 years. I've never seen 1,000 rules. I'm really curious. Put your money where your mouth is and tell us which 1,000 rules you will scrap in the environmental sphere, social sphere. Tell us.
Thank you, but not now, because we have got to the we have got to the point in our program where we'll have to wrap up the discussion and questioning and leave you each 2 minutes for your closing statement and appeals to voters. And we will now go in the opposite, the reverse order from how we started, which means Guy Verhofstadt, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Yeah, my first idea was to do it in Italian, like I did the president of the Consiglio Italiano, Mr. Conte, but I will continue in English. I understand that everybody here is more English speaker. And so my point is the following. We are living in a new world order. And we have to understand this new world order. New world order is not an order of nation states, of more than or nearly 200 nation states. New world order is an order of empires. Empires like China, like India, like Russia, like the United States of America. China is not a nation, it's a civilization. And India is also not a nation. There are 2,000 nations in India and 20 different languages and 4 big religions. And it is at the same time the biggest democracy. We have to understand that the world in which our new generations will live in Europe will be such a world. And that only together in a real European Union we can succeed and survive. And I mean with that a real European Union. Because it's maybe a little bit provocative, today the European Union doesn't exist really. It's still a confederation of nation states that is mainly deciding by unanimity. And that is always acting too little too late when something is happening. For example, a financial crisis at the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So that means that in the next 5 years, it's not about can we change a little bit this or a little bit that. There will be a time slot of 5 years to really change this nature, this character of the European Union, and to make it a real one. And for that, we have decided to abolish ourselves and to work together with a number of other pro-European centrist forces in the coming years. La République En Marche, Emmanuel Macron, but other new parties across. And in Italy, together with a new list, and I want to make a little bit of publicity here in Italy for that list, that's Più Europa, of Emma Bonino, who has an enormous record, pro-European and pro-Italy, and I hope that she can be part of that new great adventure in the coming years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Manfred Weber.
Well, I enjoy the debate because that is what Europe needs, a constructive democratic competition about the future of the European Union. First of all, the concern for the upcoming days for the upcoming weeks is that we can end up in a European Parliament which is similar to the British one, where you have only a majority against ideas and not anymore in favor. So the essence of Europe, let's keep it alive. The essence of Europe is compromise, the readiness to sit together and find a common understanding for the future. And to do so, I think we need optimism. We can be proud about what we achieved, and we can go further. We're strengthening our capacity on global level to defend the European way of life, with the idea of a master plan in the fight against cancer, all the other things we discussed already, to be concrete. And I think this to be concrete is extremely important because here in the room, and a lot of people who watch us for sure are convinced Europeans, I assume. But the bigger problem are those who are distant to the idea, are distant to what we believe in. And that's why we can only convince them if we are concrete, if we offer them a concrete idea for the future of their daily life, for the solving of a problem of their daily life. And as an EPP, we want to show people that this Europe is not a distant Europe, it's my Europe. Europe can feel like being at home. That is what I'm dreaming about, to bring it close to the citizens of the European Union. Again, that means to be democratic. And that's why my party, the EPP, works for a democratic Europe, for a Europe of projects, of concrete projects, of defending the values, guaranteeing stability. We answer the Italy first, the Poland first, the Hungary first, whatever first. We answer this with the power of we, with the cooperation, with the idea of togetherness, of unity. That is what we believe in.
Thank you very much. Frans Timmermans.
I think you all have a very important decision to make at the end of this month. I think we all have. I think we have to decide whether we want this European Union to move forward through dialogue, through understanding, through confrontation of different ideas, or whether we go for the vilification, the attacks, the insults, which are part of the toolbox of the right-wing populists. I believe this is the first time since the beginning of European integration that this European Union could actually break apart. This is no longer a nightmare or a bad dream, it is a potential reality. But I also believe that there is a vast, vast majority in European society that wants the European Union to succeed. Only this majority very often is intimidated by the ones who scream and shout and insult. We as politicians have a task to give a voice to the people who now are silent, to stand up for what they believe in, to give them courage by being courageous ourselves and address the populist, address the right extremes, say that we don't want a society based on confrontation and hate and exclusion. I think this is the most important task leading up to the European elections. The nature of the European Union will be determined by the fact whether we can stay attached to our values, fundamental values, yes or no. If we express our attachment to those values going forward and not only thinking about the past, then we can create a European Union that works for all citizens. The feeling in our population now is the European Union does not work enough for everyone. Let's create a union that works for the many, not the few. Then the EU will be strong again.
Thank you. Ska Keller.
Well, yes, election time's coming up, 26th of May, so you're all going to go to vote, hopefully, because of course you're not going to let other people decide who's going to determine your future, your European Union. You're going to make that choice yourself, hopefully, and you're going to bring all your friends and family along to make sure that also they will take the decision themselves and decide themselves about their own future. But there's actually a group of people who won't be able to choose their future, and that's young people who haven't reached yet the voting age. But I think it's especially their future that we should be looking into, because any decision that we're taking now will be affecting mostly young people, because they will be mostly, like for longest term, on this planet, in this continent, and they will have to suffer or live through happily from our decisions, the decisions that we make right now. So let's go to vote, taking into account the future of the children, of the grandchildren, of the younger people who can't go to vote. And they give us a very clear signal. They go to the streets in thousands and thousands in Rome, all over Italy, all over Europe, all over the world, because they're saying they also want to have a planet to live in. They want to have an environment where they can feel safe, where they can thrive. And we discussed this today for 5 minutes. But actually, the climate crisis, the loss of biodiversity, that is the huge global crisis that we have to confront now, because we can discuss all the other things, but we can only do so if we have a living environment. Coral reefs are dying, bees are dying out. The climate crisis is hitting our farmers, it's hitting us in Italy, it's hitting us even far in the north of Europe. But the good news is we know what to do about it, and we have a chance to act now. So let's decide to go forward, to make Europe stronger, and make sure that Europe leads the way to save our common planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have arrived at the end of our evening, so all that remains is for me to give thanks. And before thanking the candidates, I would like to thank everyone who has watched and participated in the audience here in the room, and online across Europe and perhaps beyond. By participating, you are helping to hold politicians to account, without which their legitimacy isn't worth anything. That is the democratic way, the European way. Keep doing that, make a decision, and by the end of the month, do go and vote. Let me also thank my colleagues at the FT and the European University Institute who have hosted this, and the many who have worked very hard to make this happen. And finally, of course, to the candidates, thank you for being here. Thank you for making yourselves available to the public to be held to account and propose your plans. It has been a frank and fair debate, so I thank you for respecting the rules and engaging with me and with one another so respectfully. Please, everyone, join me in thanking the candidates, and have a very good evening.
Next time I want to lower thingy.
Ja.